Hello and welcome to A Bit of a Boost with me, George Anderson. My guest today is illustrator and founder of Quoted Visually, Hannah Wilson. I first met Hannah at an event a few months ago and we got chatting about what she was doing with her work. It became very clear very quickly that we both shared a passion for personal development and a good quote. However, she has a very different approach to bringing these quotes to life and sharing them with others. So I was keen to get her on the podcast because I wanted to find out a little bit more about this and share her story with others. But also, I must admit, I was a little bit hesitant and unsure how it would translate, given that the podcast is largely an audio platform and Hannah's work is clearly so very visual. But there's so much more to Hannah, her story, and the work that she does that goes beyond the illustrations. And we discover during the course of this conversation what lies behind them. Now, Hannah's work has gained a massive following on social media over the last year or so that she's been really doing this. She's accumulated over 100,000 followers on Instagram, for example, and she does very well on other platforms as well, regularly getting shared by the likes of Diary of a CEO podcast hosts Stephen Bartlett. Now, as always, with the guests that I have here on the show on A Bit of a Boost, there are plenty of lessons and takeaways, as well as inspiration and ideas to get you thinking differently. And I know that today's episode is going to give you a bit of a boost. Hey, Hannah, how you doing? Welcome to the podcast. Really good to have you here today.
Thank you very much for having me. It's been a little while coming, but I'm so glad to be joining you today.
Yeah, we've been back and forward trying to find a time to do this. You've been very busy and getting busier as well, which is fantastic to see for you as an entrepreneur with your own business that you've set up quite recently. And actually, it's the subject matter of that business and what you do that I'm really interested to dive into. So rather than me try to kind of mangle the description of who you are and what you do, why don't you just start off by telling us a little bit about your background and what it is you spend most of your time doing these days when it comes to creative pursuits?
Yeah, of course. So for me, this has been a bit of a roller coaster journey. I started off my career in graphic design after doing a fine art degree. And I made that transition in the pandemic. It was, I trained myself up and then was in this job. And I thought, what can I do in my spare time that would kind of bring more value to me and other people? And I also, from a very foundational level, wanted a way to remember what I was reading and the podcasts I was listening to. So I wanted to find a way to do that. And I had this private Instagram account and I was putting quotes up, and then I started drawing, and it's all come together, and I've started illustrating ideas from books and little snippets that I pick up from day-to-day life, and I call them visuals, and it's basically me condensing a complex idea in a simple and easy to understand and recall way, so you can just remember it and have that in your toolkit for life, basically.
Yeah, and I love that. I've got your calendar right here next to me, which you produced. I got that at Christmas time with 12 wonderful illustrations of exactly that. And, they're so eye-catching. But I think beyond that, going back to what you said about your own personal motivation for doing this, it wasn't initially a commercial idea. It was something that you wanted a way to help you recall and remember some of the key ideas from books that you'd read, from podcasts that you listened to. And I think this is really where your work and what I do intersects, because so many people who'll be listening to this will have read amazing books or listened to amazing podcasts and have had almost kind of moments of realization, but then don't necessarily either recall or retain that information or necessarily do anything with it. And what I've seen with the works that you've been producing, and we'll share your Instagram handle at the end as well for anybody to go and check out what you're doing. We'll talk a bit more about how you've grown that source as well. But it makes it easier to, as you said, to remember, to recall, and to then maybe do something with that information. What do you think it is about the medium of illustrations or the visuals that make it easier than just a written word or a simple idea? What do you think it is about that that's so effective?
Yeah, well, I think at the end of the day, what I'm doing is I'm condensing something that might be a bit too abstract to retain and have in your headspace. But if you have a visual of a shape that transitions into a different path, or you have a volcano that erupts, and you just have this metaphor and it's more concrete in your mind. And so I think that is why doing these illustrations is helpful to myself and to other people seeing them online, because it just stands out in your mind. And then whenever you encounter a problem, you know, whether it's to do with your self-belief, you can refer back to this visual in your mind and just move forward and feel more empowered and just feel stronger for it.
Yeah, I think that's the key, really. It's not just having it in a moment of calm and quiet and scrolling through Instagram or LinkedIn and seeing one of your posts and a picture. So, oh, well, that's interesting. Yeah, that makes sense. It's being able to recall that in the moment that you need it. And I'm looking at the calendar now, and this one in particular from March, which I'm looking forward to getting to March, just so I can look at this. It's showing up daily. I'll hold it up in case I can decide to use the video for this. And basically, it's a series of yellow dots of what we think it means. So every day's got to be perfect. And then you've got what it actually means below it, which is a series of dots or circles. Some of them are full, some of them are almost empty, some of them are half full. And I think that really is the reality for the majority of us, right? And when we talk about showing up, we might have this idea in our mind that, okay, you know, it's all right, progress, not perfection. It's okay to be you know, to not show up and to be a perfect every single day. But actually with that graphic, with that illustration, all of a sudden, you're right, that's the thing that gets recalled in those moments, maybe on those days where you're not being 100% or you know, doing everything that you said you were going to do or that you wanted to do. You're only doing some of those things. And there's a real power in being able to recall a series of 8 yellow dots rather than just the idea that the general complexity of which may be something that escapes us in the moment that we need it the most.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, these I should add though, these illustrations have come from my background because I'm dyslexic. So growing up, I, you know, to study for exams, I would be doing these illustrations so that I could just get the content of the syllabus in my brain. And it's now come full circle. And I see that a real day, sort of an everyday use for the revision technique that I had back when I was a kid.
That's really interesting that you mentioned that around kind of dyslexia and finding a way through. Is that something that you've heard other people with dyslexia using that technique of drawing or using color and shapes to remember and really learn information? Or is that something that you just kind of figured out for yourself?
Maybe I figured out for myself, but also there are other people there that use visuals. So it's something that's just easy to process. Words can be overwhelming, and there's something about making it fun as well. And maybe it's just an illustration of a chicken coop, you know, something absolutely ridiculous. I can remember I had posters up all over the house, you know, even on the back of the bathroom door. You couldn't ignore it. And yeah, so I definitely think there's something in it. There's a bit of research going around, and I don't know it to the T, but how we're not they say that everybody can learn visually. It's not just potentially a group of people that are visual learners, that we all have this capacity to visually.
Yeah, I was gonna kind of bring that up actually, because some people are more inclined to visual learning. Some people are more auditory. Some people really have to experience something for that to embed. But what you're suggesting here is that actually that might be the case, but we all have the ability to learn visually and to be able to, you know, kind of access the benefits of something that's graphic rather than just the ideas. It kind of, again, going back to something else that you mentioned earlier, it's these complex ideas that maybe feel a little bit abstract, and you're depicting them as illustrations. Do you find that these ideas just jump out at you, or does it take a little bit of time for you to work on and develop? What's your process like for coming up with these illustrations?
That's a very good question. So it varies a lot, really. There are times, and I notice I go through cycles and periods where I feel like the ideas come to the surface much more, you know, quickly than other times. Usually when I'm thinking visually, I'll be, listening to a podcast, reading that book, and then I'll just be doing little drawings on the side, or I'll pause the podcast and then think, oh, I have to get this idea down. And I'll go to bed, and then there'll be all these ideas coming to the surface. And so it feels quite natural. And then there'll be other times when, there's a quiet period. And I think I need to enjoy that period too, because when you're constantly thinking about visual ideas, your mind is often on overdrive a lot of the time. And so I'm just getting used to the ebbs and flows of that creative process. And it's best not to force it. Just let it come naturally. I think that's the best advice I have.
Yeah, and that's great, actually, not just as an insight into your own creative process, but I think for anybody, we might not be professional creatives in the way that you are, but we all have to come up with solutions to problems and challenges in our lives, whether that's in work or in our relationships or other areas of our lives. And actually being able, what you said there about sometimes things will just come to us and will feel really natural. I often get some of my best ideas. I don't think I'm unique in this respect, whether I'm either in the shower or I'm out walking or driving a car. These are really useful, really good places, environments for me to be creative. If I sit down and try to solve a problem and I'm just staring at my laptop or a blank piece of paper, I find that quite difficult to do that, to force it. I think sometimes we have a tendency to feel like we need to be being productive, we need to be being creative, we need to be doing the work. And so sitting down, we might feel like we're doing something productive, but actually the ideas aren't coming. We perhaps need to take, as you described there, a more of a relaxed approach to solving problems, to being creative, and maybe taking that step back and taking some of the pressure off. I guess sometimes it could be, I would imagine it's difficult to do that when you have a deadline. Perhaps I know you work and develop content for clients. He'll come to you and say, right, Hannah, I want you to sort of, come up with a graphic to illustrate this idea that they're trying to communicate. Did they ever kind of say, right, I need this done by Friday? And you say, yeah, sure, fine. And then find yourself having a bit of a mind blank. Does that ever happen to you?
Well, usually I don't have short timelines, so I wouldn't work in 1 week, because I like to give a bit of incubation time for the idea. Okay. And sometimes, what helps, the way to combat this is if you're working on multiple ideas at once, and then you can sort of lean into and explore different options. So if one sort of is just sort of not working out, you might need to revisit it another day, sleep on it. But yeah, it can be challenging, and you just do what you can with the time that you have, and that's all that anybody ever asks of you. But yeah, it's just navigating all of that. Because I didn't say at the beginning, what I ended up doing was leaving my full-time job at the end of August last year. So that was a good, best part of the year. I did this as a side thing, and then I've moved to doing this full-time. And that's where all the excitement has started. Having the opportunity to take on all of these client requests coming my way, and just being able to say yes.
You talk about quotes, and you do a lot of quote visuals. What are some of your favorite quotes? Some of the things that have really not just inspired you with the warm, fuzzy feelings of motivation inside, but actually helped you change perhaps your approach to certain aspects of your life and work?
Yeah. Gosh, if you ask me for a favorite, there are so many, and it's just ideas.
Top 20. What would be up there with the best of the best?
because I did fine art, there was a lot of self-exploration that happened during that time. So you learn a lot about yourself. And I'd say that my favorite kind of concept that I was exploring with that and going forward into some of my graphics is the idea of emptiness as fullness. So just seeing an empty space as a space for potential. And it can be anything. It's not preset and predefined. And so in my paintings, that translates to maybe a vast empty landscape that you can stare at for hours. But in my illustrations, you'll just see posing philosophical questions, and I like that the most.
Yeah. So I mean, that's beautiful. Emptiness being fullness, and what that then leads to in terms of where your mind goes as a creative, as an artist. What are some of the others? I mean, that's exactly what I'm curious to know. You know, what are some of the other philosophical questions or points of consideration or quotes that you've really enjoyed creating visually, perhaps over the last couple of years?
Things that I've enjoyed creating. Gosh, where to start is the question. I always draw back onto this other idea, and it helps, like the foundation of looking back at my fine art. I explored the ineffable, so that's what you can't say in words, and whether these illustrations communicate what you can't say in words, that kind of thing is an interesting question to pose. In terms of the visuals that I've done now, I love the one that I've done about mental clarity and mental clutter, and how when you write what's in your mind down on paper, you can visibly see the clutter declining in my illustration. It's just you're opening up your mind to make way for clarity and letting go of what you're holding on to, essentially.
Yeah, and of course that is again something that many people will resonate with, whether they're creatives or not, because when you're feeling overwhelmed and you're feeling like you just have to get XYZ done and focus on one thing, but you can't because you've got all these other things buzzing around in your mind, you've got that mental clutter, as you put it, then actually seeing it for, as you just described there, that kind of clutter just drifting away and emptying, and then just what's left is this one thing that you need to focus your attention on. There's real not just value in that, but there's utility in that as well. For any time that we are feeling overwhelmed, if you're listening to this or watching this and you've seen this visual, this graphic, I'll get all the links in the show notes so you can easily reference these and go back to them. If you've seen that graphic, then it's so much easier to go back and see that in your mind's eye in that moment that you need it, when you're feeling overwhelmed and that clutter is distracting you from what you need to do next. And as you said there, as you were describing it, sort of, you saw it just flowing away and back to clarity again.
Yeah. And then when you see an illustration like that and you see the impact that it's had on lots of other people who viewed it, that was at one point one of my most viral posts on Instagram. And so you just know that it's such an important message for lots of people, and it's just etched in my mind. And that's just like the best part of this is my interest in self-development, and as I grow, and as I learn, I'm able to share what I'm learning, and that's the beautiful part.
And actually, I was going to ask you about that, because your Instagram channel has done incredibly well. It's grown very, very rapidly. I mean, how many followers now do you have on Instagram?
It's 100,000 followers right now, which sounds absolutely crazy. I would say that it's really hard. It's been a crazy journey. The algorithm changes all the time, and that affects what reach your account may get. And so the message that I would share on the topic of followers is it's more about the quality, not the quantity. It's about building a community and feeling connected and interacting with people from all different parts of the world, and not necessarily the sheer numbers.
Yeah.
Even though it's great to look at things, and it's social proof, it really is, but it doesn't necessarily mean that I'm going to get more clients coming through the door just because I've got more followers. So it's just quality over quantity.
Yeah, I've seen a lot of Instagram accounts that have a lot of followers but not much engagement on posts. You get a lot of engagement, a lot of comments, and that kind of links into what you just mentioned a moment ago, which was not just in terms of posts going viral and being widely shared, but actually knowing the impact that it has on other people and how other people are using what you're creating, and how that makes you feel that you're actually making a difference here as well. How much is that a driver for you to know that actually you really are making a difference, not just your own self and personal development, but with others? And do you use that perhaps as a guide as to where you should be exploring next with the content that you create, as you see what's being more popular in terms of how it's resonating with your audience?
Yes, 100%. If there's a topic that seems to be, you might call it a hot topic, where it's resonating. For example, I found this one a bit awkward, but I did an illustration about trauma and how we don't erase our trauma, we just reduce the impact it has on us. And yeah, I found sometimes if there's a topic that's resonating a lot, I actually like that one. I have other visuals that I want to make on that topic, but I just didn't want to jump on a trend. Sometimes it feels like there are very serious topics here. And particularly on that one, I had lots of comments. And I mean, some therapists were jumping in, helping me out, but of people suffering. And obviously, I'm not in the place to advise anybody on their mental health. And it's just finding that balance, isn't it, between making sure that you can help motivate other people and lead more fulfilling lives. I mean, that's the essence of me, this project. It's all about just like tapping into what makes me feel alive. And that's just a really important point. It's just like being careful. You have that responsibility, right, when you have people looking at your page. But I'm still the person that I was when I had 0 people, and it's brought on a whole level of respect, and also understanding that there are people that may have 1 million followers, but they're just a human, and it's just not putting them on a pedestal, and respecting that they have things going on in their life. Do you know what I mean? And not making them to be perfect.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that the danger is, as well as you said there, that you could use the fear of being wrong or of being brought down, or the fear of somebody disagreeing with you, to then restrict your own creative process and what you decide to put out there. And certainly I've kind of wrestled with that over the years, with like, how much of my truth do I speak in case I offend somebody, or in case somebody has a different viewpoint. And in the end, you just got to be, I think, as true to yourself as you feel you can be, and you have the confidence and certainty about, and putting out your truth into the world. It's just an opinion. And you could probably take any one of it. Just so happens that I agree with like most of your posts, and I see myself nodding along to, I think that's how I think, which is why I think I was so drawn to it. But I know that there will be other people who'll be looking at it thinking, no, that's just, I disagree, that's nonsense, you can't say that, or you can't think like that. I don't see the world in that way. And for them, it's not going to either just not resonate, or they're actually going to get quite upset about it, and will probably be posting comments on those posts that are in disagreement with the sentiment behind it. But I think it's hard to, and you're doing a tremendous job of not letting that dissuade you from carving out your own path, and just being aware that you're not going to be able to please absolutely everybody. There's probably a wider point in there as well, Hannah, not just for people who have a platform or are creatives, but for all of us. We tend to filter ourselves slightly, don't we, to make sure, some of us more than others, that we're not offending, or we're not upsetting, or we are agreeing with somebody or a group of people, even if we don't necessarily fully agree with those values and those ideals. And that can get us into all sorts of trouble and challenges as well. So
But I would definitely say on that, the lesson that I have learned is that if I can do this, if I can, well, firstly, I've mentioned this in another podcast recently, is that I realized when I was creating these illustrations and people started listening, I realized that I had something valuable to share. I realized that there was value in what I had to say. And that was a big realization for me, because I maybe at the beginning thought, oh, who cares about what I have to say about a given topic or my thoughts? But in actual fact, we can feel quite empowered in knowing that there is something that, if we have to say something about a certain topic, it does matter, and our what we have to say does matter. And completely forgot where I was going with this point, but
what I'm taking from what you just said there, and I think it was absolutely on point with the discussion we were just having there, is that when you've got something that you feel like you have something to say, it's actually believing that and listening to that little voice inside you that says, yeah, actually, here's my opinion, and there's some value, and it's valid, and then just being ready to share that and put your head above the parapet almost. And even if it may feel like sometimes it's going against the grain, and isn't what is going to be a popular opinion, although, as I said, certainly most, if not all, of your posts certainly seem to be well received in terms of popular opinion. So
Yeah. You just got to try not to, it's just avoid, I mean, controversial topics can be one way to grow, because then people kind of have something to complain about and then you get more comments. But I try and just, be compassionate for what other people's situations might be, and just realize that my life situation is definitely going to be different to the vast majority of people that are looking at my illustrations. So trying to be as careful with the way I word things is important to be relatable. I remember what I was going to say before I forgot, was that I realized I could be I realized my potential. I realized I could be and do anything that I, to an extent that I set my mind to. If I can do this and build an audience and convince people that I've got something to say, it makes you feel like you can just keep going, and you shouldn't let mindset get in the way.
And that's really interesting that you mentioned that, and I'm glad that you have that belief as well, by the way, because it's not just because I've done this, therefore I obviously will believe that I can achieve anything I put my mind to. Because there would be many people who maybe have some success in one area of their life that's like just mind-blowing, and they're just really surprised by, but kind of loving it, but would see that as being a bit of a fluke. It's just a bit of a one-off. It's just, I just got lucky, and not seeing as that as being something that will translate into the future or into other areas of life, or that it's about anything that they are producing and bringing to the party themselves. It's just, as you said, they just got lucky. So I think there's an outlook element of that. It's a mindset, it's a set of beliefs, and you clearly have a kind of a deep belief in yourself. And if you didn't have that, you probably wouldn't have left the comfort of employment in order to pursue the life of an entrepreneur. Whoever it was that said, if you do what you love, then you'll never have to work a day in your life, has obviously never been an entrepreneur. Right. So but I there's so much wrapped up in what you've talked about and shared today, and it's made me think as well about one of the things that has, the conversation we were just having there around kind of sharing your truth, and not necessarily wanting to kind of push too far into controversy just for the sake of it, but also not wanting to use the fact that something might be controversial or people might have a different opinion as a reason to not say something. And in my world and what I do, like I regard myself as being reasonably positive and motivated. And some of the things that I do and the approach that I take to applying to problems and to challenges in my life aren't going to be for everybody. I've sometimes held back from talking about, well, look, here's a way forward. It might not be for everybody, but this is what's worked for me, and this is maybe what can work for you as well. Because I've always been a little bit, but what if somebody disagrees, or what if that isn't the way that somebody else approaches it, or maybe that's actually quite destructive for somebody. So I always have to put these caveats around it. But I've got much better over the years at speaking my truth and just saying, well, look, this is my experience, as well as some of the things that I know to be working for others as well. So yeah, I think there's, I'll be following you and taking inspiration from the graphics that you illustrate for a long time to come. Long may it continue. Like I said, I've got my calendar next to me to inspire me every day with that month's illustration. But where is the best place? Is it Instagram for people to go and find out more about you and the work that you do, or do you have your website? What are the kind of the links, Hannah, to you and your work?
So yeah, Instagram, Twitter, or LinkedIn. I post, if I can, 3 times a week I post. And then also you can find me on my website. It's just quotedvisually.co.uk. And yeah, stay tuned. Hopefully I'll be releasing some prints. So if you want illustration on your wall to remind you, of a particular idea that's, important to you, go ahead. I'll make that available.
Brilliant. Back of the bathroom door.
Back of the bathroom door, exactly. There we go.
You sit there and stare at it for a few minutes each day. No, fantastic. Yeah. Look, Hannah, really good having you on the podcast. Thanks for making the time in your busy schedule. And as I said, I look forward to following your work into the future and finding out more. Thank you.